Imagine you're wandering through this endless, blistering desert. You're completely lost, your supplies are running dangerously low, and you just crest this massive sand dune.
Right, a real survival situation.
Exactly. And sitting right there, right in the middle of nowhere, is this flawless, glowing, humming supercomputer. It's completely out of place.
Oh, wow. Just sitting in the sand.
Just sitting there. But somehow, intrinsically, that encoded inside this machine is the exact software required to solve world hunger.
Okay, that is quite the setup.
Right. I mean, it contains these architectural blueprints to completely eradicate poverty, the algorithms to organize human society into absolute peace. It is the ultimate civilizational code.
So you have the answer to everything right in front of you.
Exactly. So what do you do with it? Well, you unplug it, you drag it miles back to your house, you set it on your desk, and you use it as a highly decorative, glowing paperweight.
A paperweight, wow.
Yeah. You polish the casing every single day. You invite your friends over to sing these beautiful songs about how magnificent the screen looks. You might even kiss the keyboard out of sheer reverence.
But you never actually plug it in.
Never. You never plug it in, and you never, ever run the code.
I mean, it sounds like sheer madness when you frame it as a technological parable like that.
It really does.
But honestly, that tragic image is the exact reality of what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We have literally been handed the code, but humanity has spent centuries just, staring at the monitor.
Praising the hardware.
Praising the hardware and entirely ignoring the software that was actually meant to be executed.
Well, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are jumping straight into a stack of meticulously translated lecture notes and excerpts today.
And these notes analyze a very specific portion of the Quran, right?
Yes, Surah Al-Imran, specifically verses 123 through 129. But we aren't looking at this through the traditional orthodox interpretations you might find in a standard theology class.
Right, we're taking a completely different angle.
We are examining these texts through the fiercely rationalist framework of Allama G. Parwez. And our mission today is to completely upend the way you might understand ancient, revered texts.
By dismantling what these sources refer to as the ritual trap.
The ritual trap. I love that phrase because it just perfectly captures this widespread, really naive misconception.
It really does. Because the trap is this deeply ingrained human habit of treating profound constitutional texts purely as sources of supernatural blessings.
Like reciting verses just to unspiritual brownie points.
Exactly, or hanging them on your rearview mirror as a talisman to ward off traffic accidents, while remaining completely ignorant of the rigorous socioeconomic justice that the text actually demands.
It's the equivalent of having that desert supercomputer and hoping that if you just rub the screen enough times, a sandwich will magically materialize in front of you.
Which completely undermines the entire purpose of the machine.
Right.
What this rationalist analysis does is draw a hard, uncompromising line between two concepts, mazhab and din.
Okay, let's break those down.
So, mazhab is the illusion we've created. It is religion understood merely as a set of dogmatic rituals. It's human beings sitting around in a state of passive waiting, just, hoping for supernatural intervention to fix their broken world.
Basically waiting to be rescued.
Precisely. Din, on the other hand, is the reality of the text. It is a tangible, socio-political, and economic system of life.
So it's not a religion in the Western post-Enlightenment sense of the word?
No, not at all. It's not relegated to a private weekend activity. It is a comprehensive civilizational blueprint.
But, blueprints are totally useless if you don't know how to read the legend.
That is very true.
When I was looking through these notes, the biggest roadblock seemed to be language. We are dealing with Arabic terms that have been filtered through centuries of mysticism.
And language dictates perception.
Oh.
If your vocabulary is mystified, your worldview is going to be mystified.
So if we're going to understand this as a systemic manual rather than like a book of magic spells, we have to start by decoding the vocabulary. We have to strip away that mystical varnish.
Which Parwez's framework does brilliantly. It provides a linguistic key that shifts our understanding from religious definitions to strict systemic definitions.
Let's look at that in action. There's a pair of concepts in the text that are constantly linked, tawakkul and taqwa.
Yes, those two are foundational.
If you ask almost anyone what tahul means, they will tell you it means trust in God.
Right, but in everyday practice, that often translates into catastrophic passivity.
Like the student who refuses to study for a final exam claiming, God will help me pass.
Exactly. It's sitting idly, doing absolutely nothing, and just waiting for a divine rescue mission.
And taqwa is almost universally translated as fear of God or ritual piety, right?
Right. The idea being that if you are just a fearful, morally polite person who performs the right rituals, the universe will just automatically reward you.
But the rationalist analysis of these Arabic roots fundamentally destroys that passive mindset.
It does. Parwez defines tawakkul not as passive reliance, but as supreme, unshakable self-confidence.
Wait, I have to stop you there. Self-confidence.
Yes, self-confidence.
That sounds like a modern self-help seminar, not a translation of a 7th century text. How do you get self-confidence from trusting the divine?
Because you have to ask what exactly you are trusting. In this framework, you are not trusting a localized deity to bend the rules of reality just for you.
Okay, so what do you trust him?
You're trusting the absolute reliability of the objective laws of nature and the divine roadmap. Think of an aviation engineer designing a commercial airliner.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
When that engineer watches their plane take off, they aren't crossing their fingers and hoping a mystical force keeps the metal in the sky.
Right, they know the physics.
Exactly. They have tawakkul. They have supreme confidence because they have built the aircraft precisely according to the invariable laws of aerodynamics, thrust, and lift. They trust the system.
Wow. And because they trust the universal system, they have absolute confidence in their own executed work.
Precisely. That is true tawakkul.
That reframes everything.
Right.
So if tawakkul is the confidence of the aviation engineer, then what is taqwa? It can't just be sitting in the hangar feeling afraid of the sky.
No, not at all. Taqwa is the meticulous, hypervigilant, guarding against the violation of those natural laws.
It is the practical execution.
Yes. If tawakkul is trusting aerodynamics, taqwa is double-checking every single titanium rivet on the fuselage. It is calculating the wind resistance, testing the hydraulics.
Leaving absolutely zero room for negligence.
Exactly. Taqwa means to protect yourself from the destructive consequences of breaking the structural laws of the universe by adhering to them flawlessly.
It is the mechanism through which a community guarantees its success.
Right. But I know this is a tough pill to swallow for some people.
Yeah, I see the logic, but I'm going to push back here on behalf of anyone who finds comfort in the traditional view.
Go for it.
If divine help isn't a literal magical intervention from the sky, if it really is just a strictly following the rules of cause and effect, doesn't that strip the text of its wonder?
That's a very common reaction.
Doesn't that take the miracle out of the equation and leave us with a dry physics textbook?
That is the most profound philosophical hurdle when encountering this school of thought. But the rationalist rebuttal is that we have entirely misunderstood what a miracle actually is.
Okay, so what is a miracle then?
The true miracle is human agency. The text argues that the hand of God operates exclusively through the hands of human beings who are acting with tawakkul and taqwa.
So we are the mechanism.
Yes. The miracle is that a biological creature can align its internal will with the objective laws of the universe to completely reshape reality. When an engineer builds a machine that defies gravity, that is the miracle.
That makes a lot of sense.
Demanding that the laws of physics be suspended to save you from your own negligence isn't looking for miracle, it's demanding chaos.
Waiting for a supernatural rescue mission actually violates the core constitutional laws of this blueprint.
Exactly. It's completely counterproductive.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. The miracle isn't the suspension of the rules. The miracle is human mastery over them.
Which leads perfectly into what is arguably the most controversial linguistic shift in these notes.
The concept of Malaika.
Yes, Malaika.
Yeah.
If you want to see how severely vocabulary has been hijacked by ancient mythologies, look no further than this word.
The traditional mazhab view is ubiquitous across so many cultures. Malaika are literal, invisible, winged beings, angels.
Entities that descend from the clouds wielding glowing swords to fight physical battles alongside chosen believers.
The ultimate supernatural cavalry riding over the hill at the 11th hour. It makes for a great movie scene, but how does the systemic framework redefine it?
It goes back to the etymological roots. According to the lexicons, the term Malaika traces back to mulk,
Which signifies power, control, and authority.
Right. Right. Or a look, which means a message or a messenger carrying out a directive. So Parwez argues that Malaika represent the Mudabbarat al-Amr.
The executive forces of the universe.
Exactly. They are the objective forces that implement the laws of nature.
So we are talking about the mechanics of reality itself. How does that manifest?
It manifests in two distinct domains, the macro and the micro. In the macro world, the physical universe Malaika are the objective forces of nature.
Like gravity, electromagnetism, thermodynamic.
Yes, atomic energy. The blueprint states that humanity's ultimate elevation requires the scientific mastery and subjugation of these natural forces.
There is a concept in the text called taskir-e Malaika, right? Which translates to the conquering or harnessing of the angels.
Exactly.
So when humanity figured out how to split the atom, or when we developed the mathematics to launch a satellite into orbit, we were literally engaging in taskir-e Malaika.
Yes. We are subjugating the executive forces of the universe to serve human progress. You don't pray to the forces of nature. You study them, understand them, and harness them.
That is mind-blowing. But you mentioned a micro domain as well.
Right. The macro world is only half the equation. The second domain of Malaika is entirely internal. It operates within human consciousness.
The psychological forces.
Yes. Internally, Malaika represent the psychological faculties within the human mind. The forces of resilience, extreme focus, courage, and psychological equilibrium.
So when a human being aligns their mindset with the objective truth of the system, these internal forces descend upon their consciousness, stabilizing them.
Precisely. Which brings us to the final key term in our linguistic decoding. Saber.
Sabe. I always heard saber described as patience. You know, you lose your job, you get sick, or someone wrongs you, and you just endure it quietly.
Right. You suffer in silence, you don't complain, and your reward is deposited into an afterlife bank account.
That is a definition of passive suffering, and honestly, it is a phenomenal tool if you want to keep a population subjugated.
Oh, absolutely. If you convince an oppressed society that quiet endurance is a virtue, they will never revolt.
But the systemic definition of saber is active steadfastness.
Yes. Think of a shield wall in an ancient Spartan phalanx.
Oh, I love that analogy. Saber isn't standing there letting the enemy hit you.
No. Saber is planting your feet in the mud, locking your shield with the person next to you, leaning your entire body weight into the bronze.
Refusing to yield a single inch of ground no matter how hard the opposing force pushes.
That is a perfect visualization. Saber is holding the line within the system. It is gritty, determined perseverance, especially on the battlefield or in the face of massive societal opposition.
Because if you drop your shield, the line breaks and everyone perishes.
Exactly. Saber is the active, exhausting work of maintaining your structural integrity under extreme pressure.
It makes you look at your own day-to-day life completely differently, doesn't it? How often are we sitting on the couch wrapped in our own anxieties, waiting for a miracle to fix our careers or our relationships?
We fall right into the ritual trap.
Hoping things magically improve when this blueprint is screaming at us that the only way forward is to harness our psychological fortitude.
Our internal Malaika.
Right. And meticulously execute the natural laws of cause and effect, our taqwa to actively, stubbornly force a result through saber.
It transforms the human being from a passive recipient of fate into an active architect of reality.
Okay, so in theory, this sounds incredibly empowering. It's a brilliant philosophy, but philosophy is cheap until you put it under maximum pressure.
Very true.
How did this psychological rewiring actually hold up when these people were facing literal annihilation? Because Surah Al-Imran isn't just an abstract treatise, it is actively analyzing the historical bloody battlefields of Badr and Uhud.
To understand how the blueprint functions under the extreme duress of war, we have to examine what Parwez identifies as the social physics of the text.
The social physics.
Specifically, a core principle called the law of internal revolution.
It sounds like the title of a sociology dissertation, but the mechanics behind it are fascinating.
It is a universal, invariable law outlined throughout the Quran. It basically states that no external societal, economic, or military condition can change without a preceding psychological and intellectual revolution within the individuals of that society.
So the external world is merely a physical reflection of the internal psychological state of the community?
Exactly. You cannot change a corrupt government, you cannot fix a broken economy, and you certainly cannot win a war against a superior military force if the individuals fighting haven't undergone a total internal transformation.
You can't put new software on corrupted hardware.
Perfectly said. And the target state of this internal revolution, the optimal operating system, is called itminan equal.
Absolute inner equilibrium.
Yes. This is the exact moment when the internal Malaika, those psychological forces of absolute certainty and fortitude, take root in the human consciousness.
And when a person achieves Itmineni Kolb, two highly destructive psychological viruses are completely neutralized, right?
Right. The first is Kaf, which is the fear of the future, the anxiety of external threats, or the terror of death.
And the second is Huzn,
which is grief, sorrow, or regret over the past.
Think about the neurological implications of that. Human beings make almost all of their worst decisions out of either fear of what might happen or grief over what has already occurred.
Exactly. We are paralyzed by it.
Imagine operating in a high-stakes environment with zero fear and zero grief. Your cognitive bandwidth wouldn't be wasted on anxiety.
Your situational awareness would be flawless. You would be a machine of pure, unadulterated focus.
Which perfectly explains the military mathematics of the Battle of Badr.
It does. Let's look at the sheer numbers of Badr because historically, it makes no sense.
Right. You have a nascent, vastly under-equipped community of roughly 300 individuals, and they are facing down a professional, heavily armed, highly experienced military force of about 1,000 soldiers from Mecca.
Under any normal metric of military logic, the 300 get entirely wiped out. It should have been a massacre.
But they win.
And the Orthodox Mazhab explanation is that 3,000 invisible angels with glowing wings flew down from the clouds and physically decapitated the enemy soldiers for them.
But if you apply the rationalist framework, the text's mention of 3,000 to 5,000 Malaika mathematically represents the exponential multiplication of human strength.
When absolute psychological equilibrium is achieved. Yes.
It's a force multiplier.
Precisely. In military science, a force multiplier is a factor like superior communication, high ground, or advanced technology that dramatically increases the effectiveness of an item or group.
And in this case, the force multiplier is psychological.
Yes. When an individual is internally fortified, when they have eradicated Khalf and Huzn, possessing absolute self-confidence and unwavering active steadfastness, their physical output, their endurance, and their strategic execution are exponentially multiplied.
So the descent of the angel is really the descent of absolute unbreakable psychological certainty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A small, out-equipped force that is psychologically anchored to a higher systemic purpose will systematically dismantle a much larger enemy that is fighting for base, fragile reasons, like tribal ego, financial loot, or sheer coercion.
It's like the concept of an athletic flow state, but scaled up to a civilizational military level.
That's a great way to put it.
When an athlete is in flow, time seems to slow down, their reflexes are perfect, and they perform feats that seem superhuman. Now multiply that by 300 soldiers fighting for their very existence.
But the text doesn't stop there. It doesn't just say, get in the flow state and you'll always win.
Right. It treats the battlefield like a strict physics equation through what the sources call the law of requital.
The law of cause and effect.
It's vital to understand that this system isn't managed by an emotional deity who hurls lightning bolts at sinners and hands out participation trophies to believers.
No, the law of requital is the scientific, unavoidable consequence of your social and strategic conduct.
The universe does not care what you call yourself. It does not play favorites based on religious labels.
And the ultimate, undeniable proof of this objective reality is the Battle of Uhud.
Which is the second historical case study analyzed in these verses.
Yes, Uhud is the ultimate demonstration of the system's impartiality.
Walk us through the physics of the failure at Uhud, because it completely shatters the idea of unconditional divine protection.
Well, during the Battle of Uhud, the defending community initially had the upper hand. The strategy was sound. The psychological equilibrium was holding.
So what went wrong?
Crucially, the commander had placed a specific contingent of archers on a strategic elevated pass a hill to protect the army's flank from the enemy's highly mobile cavalry.
And the directive given to those archers was absolute and systemic.
Right. Do not leave your posts under any circumstances. Even if you see us victorious, even if you see us being slaughtered, hold the line.
That was their taqwa.
Yes, the meticulous guarding of the systemic strategy.
But the human ego is a fragile thing.
It really is. As the battle seemed to turn in their favor, the enemy began to retreat, leaving behind equipment and wealth.
And the archers on the hill, seeing the victory and wanting to participate in the gathering of the spoils of war, abandoned their strategic posts.
They violated the structural laws of military strategy. They abandoned taqwa. They chased the loot.
Gravity doesn't care if you're holding a holy book. If you step off a cliff, you will fall.
Exactly.
Did the invisible angels stick around to save them because they were the chosen people fighting for the right cause?
Absolutely not. The objective laws of cause and effect instantly took over without an ounce of sympathy.
The enemy cavalry commander saw the abandoned pass, wheeled his horses around, flanked the defenders, and attacked from the rear.
The result was a devastating, chaotic, physical defeat for the believers. The system is brutally impartial.
If you break the structural laws of physics or psychology or military strategy, you will suffer the mathematical consequences.
The Quranic text analyzing Uhud makes it incredibly clear. Divine assistance is strictly conditional. It operates on an if-then algorithm.
If you remain steadfast and if you follow the laws, then you will succeed.
Break the laws. Let your ego drive your actions, and the forces of nature will crush you just as easily as they would anyone else.
That is a harsh, incredibly sobering reality, but it's also wildly empowering. It means the steering wheel is entirely in our hands.
We aren't victims of a capricious fate. We are the engineers of our own survival.
So let's play this out. Let's say the psychological fortitude holds. The strategy is flawless. The archers stay on the hill, and the physical battle is won.
Okay, assuming victory.
When you dig into these notes, there is a fascinating narrative pivot. The sources point out that once the psychological fortitude wins the physical battle, the actual test of the system, the real revolution, begins the exact millisecond the swords are lowered.
This is where we transition from the mechanics of military operations to the foundations of constitutional law. Winning a war is relatively easy compared to what comes next.
The text introduces a radical concept designed to instantly strip victorious commanders of their personal authority.
Yes, this part truly stops you in your tracks. Because if you look at human history, from the Romans to the Mongols to modern conflicts, why do victorious armies fight? What is the incentive structure of war?
The incentive is the paycheck, the spoils.
Historically, armies fought for the right to loot, pillage, seize territory, and take captives. To the victor go the spoils.
That was the unshakable, unspoken rule of human conflict for millennia. The conquest of an enemy was the ultimate vehicle for personal enrichment and the inflation of the conqueror's ego.
But the Quranic blueprint introduces the concept of amr, and it uses it to completely short-circuit that historical incentive structure.
Let's dig into the linguistics of amr, because it is beautifully poetic.
It really is. The root of the word traces back to the physical stones that ancient Arabs would meticulously place in the shifting, featureless sands of the desert.
To mark the precise, correct path to an oasis or a destination.
Exactly. In a desert, a path disappears in the wind. Without those stones, without the amr, you wander aimlessly, you run out of water, and you die.
Therefore, Amr evolved to mean the ultimate, absolute, directive, or centralized authority.
Right. It is the objective constitutional direction that a society must follow, leaving absolutely zero room for human whim, emotion, or ego.
So, immediately post-battle, Surah Al-Imran delivers a verse that must have been a massive constitutional shock to the system. Laisa laka min al-amri shay'un.
You have no authority in this matter.
I try to imagine the sheer audacity of saying that to a victorious general. You just survived a brutal melee. You conquered the enemy. The adrenaline is still pumping through your veins.
The immense wealth of the defeated army is lying at your feet.
And the blueprint of your civilization steps in and says, stop, you own nothing here. You have zero personal authority over any of this.
It is the ultimate systemic ego death. The text radically strips victorious commanders, officers, and individual soldiers of any personal authority.
Any right to vengeance.
Any ownership over the defeated enemies or captured territories. All affairs, all wealth, and all strategic decisions must be strictly surrendered to the central divine law.
Represented practically by the Markazi Milat, the community center or central authority.
Which leads directly into the policy regarding Mali Ganimat, the war booty.
Right. If you strip the commander of authority, you must also strip the soldier of the economic incentive for violence.
Soldiers are categorically outlawed from fighting for personal enrichment. You cannot loot a village, take the gold, and build a mansion back home.
All captured assets, land, and wealth must be transferred entirely to the jurisdiction of the central system.
Exactly.
But why? Why not let the soldiers who bled for the victory enjoy the rewards?
Because if you do, you instantly create a newly rich military elite, which invariably leads to a highly stratified, oppressive class system.
Ah, I see.
By centralizing the wealth, the Markaz ensures that those assets are utilized exclusively for the collective socio-economic needs of the entire society, including the poorest and most vulnerable.
The military defends the state, it does not own the state.
Precisely.
That alone is a massive leap forward in societal organization. But the blueprint goes even further, stepping into what is undeniably the most revolutionary legal directive in this entire stack of sources.
The absolute, unequivocal abolition of human enslavement.
We have to firmly contextualize this to understand the magnitude of the shift. We are talking about a text from the 7th century.
At that time, the entire global economy, from the Byzantine Empire to the Sassanids to the tribal structures of Arabia, was inextricably built on the institution of slavery.
And the primary engine for fueling that slave trade was the taking of prisoners of war.
Man-made jurisprudence universally permitted taking captured soldiers and civilians, classifying them as subhuman property, and distributing them as personal slaves or concubines.
It was the unquestioned norm of human civilization.
But the text categorically tears up that ancient rulebook, and it does so not with a sword, but with vocabulary.
It applies two very specific terms to the captured enemies, Ghafur and Rahim.
Again, the traditional mazhab view completely dilutes these words. If you ask a conventional scholar, they will tell you Ghafur means God arbitrarily forgives sins.
And Rahim means God shows mystical mercy in the afterlife. It's entirely theological.
But the systemic, rationalist view brings those concepts crashing right back down to earth, specifically onto the battlefield.
Parwez unpacks the etymology. Ghafur originates from a root that means providing an umbrella of safety and security.
It literally refers to a physical helmet or a protective shield. Maghfirat isn't mystical forgiveness. It is tangible, physical protection from harm.
And Rahim is the active provision of evolutionary nourishment and sustenance.
It shares a root with the word for a mother's womb, an environment designed entirely for systemic, unconditional nourishment and growth.
So when the constitutional blueprint dictates that the system must act with Ghafur and Rahim toward the defeated enemy, what does that translate to in actual legal mandates?
It legally mandates a complete cessation of exploitation. Victorious armies cannot distribute POWs as personal property. It legally outlaws human enslavement.
Instead, the captives immediately fall under the total jurisdiction of the central authority.
And that authority is commanded by constitutional law to grant those captives fundamental human rights. They must be given physical protection, Ghafur.
Meaning no torture, no execution, no abuse.
Exactly. And they must be placed in an environment of evolutionary nourishment, Rahim. They must be fed, housed, medically treated, and treated with absolute dignity.
And once the conflict has cooled, the text states they must be released, either as an unconditional favor or through a mutual ransom exchange.
Right.
I really want to pause and let the sheer scale of this civilizational shift sink in. You are taking a society that, for thousands of years, was driven by individual ego, tribal vengeance, and the brutal economic exploitation of captured human beings.
And you are forcefully rewiring it into a society governed entirely by objective constitutional law.
A society where the enemy soldier who was literally trying to sever your head from your shoulders yesterday is guaranteed physical security and systemic nourishment by your government today.
It's breathtaking. It is the invention of universal human rights centuries before the Geneva Conventions.
It is the bedrock of universal human dignity. But here is where the sources make their most profound, almost whiplash-inducing connection.
Because securing human rights for prisoners is only one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Exactly. This brings us to the economic engine of the blueprint. Because if you are reading Surah Al-Imran, you are reading these intense, granular, psychological breakdowns of the bloody battlefields of Badr and Uhud.
You are deeply immersed in life and death, the forces of nature, strategy, and the handling of captured enemies.
And then instantly, without skipping a beat, verse 130 completely pivots to prohibiting financial usury or riba.
It jumps directly from the military battlefield to the economic ledger.
It is incredibly jarring the first time you read it. What on earth is the logical connection between military survival and banking regulations? Why pivot from swords to interest rates?
To the traditional mindset, it makes no sense because they view the text as a collection of separate compartments. Here is the religious chapter on war, and over here is the separate religious chapter on financial sins.
But in the comprehensive system of din, they are the exact same subject.
Exactly. The expert analysis here reveals a brilliant tactical reality. Physical military defense is merely phase one of societal survival. You secure the physical borders so you don't get wiped out by a foreign army.
But the ultimate, most severe battlefield, the final boss of civilizational survival, is the economic domain.
It is the daily grinding struggle for existence.
Because what good is a heavily fortified, militarily impenetrable border if the people living inside it are starving to death or enslaved by debt?
A society's survival is intrinsically, inseparably tied to its internal economic justice. A fortified, militarily victorious community can easily be hollowed out and destroyed from the inside by economic exploitation.
The text treats economic oppression as the highest, most destructive form of warfare against the divine system.
So let's dissect this concept of riba. Traditionally, it's taught simply as don't charge interest on a personal loan because it's a religious sin.
But systemically, riba represents the entirety of exploitative capitalism. It is the structural mechanism that subjugates humanity by allowing wealth to circulate exclusively among the already wealthy.
It is the hoarding of resources, the artificial creation of scarcity to drive up prices, and the capitalization on human desperation.
Think of modern predatory algorithmic lending, where the system is mathematically designed to ensure you can never actually pay off the principal, trapping you in a perpetual cycle of debt.
It's the system where capital makes exponentially more capital, while physical labor makes pennies.
And the sources are arguing that dismantling this capitalist mechanism is the very next immediate societal action item required after securing physical borders.
Anti-riba operations are just as critical, if not more critical, than anti-siege military operations.
They are absolutely more critical, because if you do not structurally dismantle riba, you inevitably recreate the exact hierarchies of slavery that you just fought a bloody war to abolish.
You don't need to put a human being in physical iron chains if you can put them in unbreakable economic chains.
If a person must work 3 jobs just to afford basic sustenance and shelter, yielding all their surplus value to a landlord or a corporate entity, they are structurally enslaved.
Exactly. So if riba, this exploitative hoarding of wealth, is the ultimate evil in this constitutional system, what is the divine alternative? What replaces it?
You can't just tear down an economy without building a new one.
The divine alternative is a concept called the system of providence, or nizami rubigat.
Rububiyat. Let's break that down carefully because it originates from a word that almost everyone thinks they understand completely.
It comes from the Arabic root rab. Conventionally, and rather lazily, this is translated simply as Lord.
This translation implies an anthropomorphic deity sitting on a golden throne, demanding to be praised and worshipped through physical rituals.
But Parwez provides a rigorous, rationalist linguistic breakdown. Rab fundamentally means the provider of complete, systemic nourishment and evolutionary development.
It means taking an entity from its nascent, weakest state and gradually, systematically nourishing it until it reaches its highest possible state of physical and intellectual perfection.
So, accepting Allah as your Rab isn't just a religious chant or a declaration of faith.
Far from it. Declaring Allah as the sole Rab is a revolutionary socio-political and economic declaration.
It is a strict mandate to build an earthly economic infrastructure where the central system, the markaz, acts as the universal provider of nourishment on behalf of the divine.
It means actively dismantling any earthly hierarchy where one human being plays lord or provider over another human being.
Let's fully explore the sociological implications of this. The goal of the blueprint is to construct an economic infrastructure where absolutely no human being is economically dependent on the whims of another individual.
In this system, you don't have to rely on the philanthropy of a benevolent billionaire. You don't have to beg for charity on the street.
You don't have to subjugate your dignity to an exploitative employer or a predatory landlord just to survive.
Your basic human needs, your systemic nourishment, food, shelter, healthcare, education, are unconditionally guaranteed by the constitutional system itself.
It completely eradicates human enslavement at its root. Because if no individual controls your access to the fundamental necessities of life, no individual can enslave you.
The entire apparatus we've discussed today, the psychological Malaika fortifying your mind, the physical subjugation of nature through science, the constitutional Amar centralizing authority, all of it exists for one singular, overarching purpose.
To establish Nizam-i-Rububiyat, the system of universal nourishment.
Which brings me to the ultimate perspective-shattering realization I had while going through this material. The traditional orthodox view of Jannat Paradise is that it is this exclusive, localized, mystical garden in the afterlife.
The narrative is, life on earth is meant to be miserable. It's a test.
Just suffer through the poverty, endure the oppression, be patient with your misery, and after you die, you will be rewarded with rivers of milk and honey.
The ultimate waiting room mentality. Suffer the exploitation now, get compensated in a different dimension later. It's a theology that highly benefits the ruling class.
But that completely misses the point of the blueprint.
It entirely contradicts it. In this rationalist framework, Janet's defined as a continuous state of existence, free from fear cough and free from scarcity hus.
It is an optimal, highly evolved societal state, and crucially, it is a state that must be initiated here on Earth.
You have to build it. It's not handed to you. You construct it.
You build it through scientific mastery task here Malaika, conquering the objective forces of nature to produce massive agricultural and technological abundance.
And you build it through uncompromising economic justice, eradicating riba, and establishing rububiyat, to ensure that the abundance you've created is distributed equitably to every single human being.
The sources argue forcefully. You cannot possibly attain the heavenly paradise in the afterlife if you haven't done the rigorous, systemic, physical work to build the earthly paradise, here and now.
Human salvation is not an escape from the physical world. It is the radical transformation of the physical world.
It is the stark difference between buying a lottery ticket and hoping to get rich versus going to architectural school, studying structural engineering for a decade, and actually learning how to build a self-sustaining, poverty-free city from the ground up.
The blueprint is in our hands. We just have to plug the machine in.
Let's step back and synthesize this massive paradigm shift we've explored today. We started with the tragedy of the ritual trap, the habit of using profoundly advanced civilizational code as a glowing, mystical paperweight.
But by applying the rationalist lens of Allama G. Parwez, we've decoded the actual language of the matrix.
We've seen that true divine assistance isn't a magical intervention. It is strictly contingent upon human agency.
It requires the hypervigilant strategic action of taqwa, the psychological fortification of our internal malaika to eradicate fear and grief, and the supreme, scientifically grounded self-confidence of tawakkul.
We've learned that physical victory on a battlefield is entirely meaningless if it's driven by ego, tribalism, and the desire for loot.
The constitutional directive of Amr demands the absolute centralization of wealth and the unequivocal abolition of human enslavement.
Mandating systemic physical protection, Ghafoor, and nourishment, Rahim, for all human beings, even your defeated enemies.
And we've realized that the ultimate battlefield for human survival is the economy. A society must move instantly from securing its physical borders to actively eradicating the exploitative capitalism of riba.
It must establish a system of universal nourishment, rububiyat, to ensure that no human being is ever economically subjugated by another.
We have moved from reciting a religious placeholder to uncovering a rigorous, highly actionable blueprint for human elevation.
And I want you, the listener, to view your own reality through this lens. This blueprint demands active, unrelenting participation. Knowledge is completely useless unless it is understood and applied.
Sitting back, scrolling through a world on fire and waiting for a miracle is not just lazy. According to the laws of this text, it is a fatal violation of the system's core physics.
You have the code. The universe is waiting for you to run it.
But as we look toward the future and toward the practical application of this civilizational blueprint, we must confront a vital, deeply complex vulnerability in the system.
What's that?
We've established today that the economic system, the markaz, must act as the guarantor of universal nourishment rububiyat.
Right. The central authority takes the wealth and redistributes it to ensure no one is enslaved by poverty.
But this raises an incredibly important, almost terrifying question for our own modern era. What happens when the central authority itself becomes corrupt?
Oh, wow. That's a massive issue.
Or perhaps even more dangerously, what happens when the system of universal nourishment is threatened not by bad actors, but by a global, unprecedented scarcity of natural resources?
Like ecological collapse.
Yes. When the global supply chains collapse, when the rivers run dry and the crops fail due to ecological disaster, how does the Quranic blueprint safeguard against the collapse of the very markaz it commands us to build?
Oof. That is a chilling thought. A perfectly designed, flawlessly engineered engine still needs fuel to run.
Exactly.
And if the mechanics running the engine become corrupt, or if the fuel simply vanishes, the whole thing seizes up and the society collapses.
It's the ultimate stress test for the civilizational blueprint.
Well, that critical vulnerability, the corruption of the center, and the harsh reality of global scarcity is exactly what we will be tackling in our next deep dive into this material. Until then, look closely at the systems operating around you and ask yourself, are you just waiting for an angel to save you, or are you ready to build the blueprint?